Tim, about your new book, how is the GAA connected with Irish freedom?
Oh, it's one of the principal movements in the whole national movement, if not the one in terms of numbers. To go back to first principles, the Fenians were very keen to get going again after the failure of the Fenian Rising and, of course, the famine. And there was a need in the country to do something for young men. The great Archbishop Croke, the patron of the society, became their patron because he saw the value of it instantly. He said at the time one of the worst things that affected him, depressed him going around the country, was the number of fine-looking young men he saw lying in ditches, their hands in their pockets, nothing to do, and no work, depression. And Michael Cusack, for example, now was the founder. He was a great believer in Irish culture and Irish sports in particular. He was a sportsman, he was a fine big man. And there was another man called Nally. Nally Stand is named after him today in Croke Park. He was a very fine type of man. His father was a fairly substantial landowner in Mayo, and there he held athletic content and won a lot because he was very athletic, fine cut of a man as well as being a man of character. And he and Cusack were walking one Sunday in the summer of preceding the founding in 1884 of the actual GAA in Hayes' Hotel that we all know about that October, and it struck them. It was like the dog that didn't bark. Where was everybody? There was nobody playing ball, there was no kicking football, no hurling of course at all. And they said, this is terrible, no activity. And kind of a microcosm of that Goldsmith poem, The Deserted Village. Ill fares the land where wealth accumulates and men decay. And the result was that Cusack organised, wrote articles, and the result of them was that a small group of people met in Hayes Hotel in Thurles and founded the GAA. One of them was actually a rugby international, and he'd been in the RIC, McCarthy, and he had to keep his head down, both from the Fenians and from the RIC. And of course, Cusack was there himself. Nally subsequently died. His Fenian activities led him to jail, where he got bad treatment, and a coroner's inquest found that he died as a result of his treatment. He actually had typhoid. That could have been induced, of course.
Memorable words. Go back and tell those whom you represent that Pat Nally would not be a traitor to his country for all the gold that ever passed through the Mint of England, or for the highest honours which England can bestow. The answer of an Irish soldier during fatal torture to the government emissary who visited him in the prison cell offering liberty honours, and the rest. If P.W. Nally would only give evidence against Charles Stewart Parnell, in the Times Commission. The answer sealed his doom. In loving memory of Patrick William Nally of Roxtown House, Bala, patriot and martyr, born 13th of March 1856 and done to death in Mountjoy Prison on the eve of his liberty, 9th November 1891, by the brutal jailers of England, after 10 years penal torture. A model of every manly virtue, he had no enemies except the enemies of Ireland. His life was a record of unselfish patriotism. He endured fatal imprisonment with the courage of an Irish soldier. His example is cherished with gratitude and remembered with pride, such as P.W. Nally are the hope of the nation. R.I.P.
Patrick Nally's coffin was draped in the flag that was also used for Charles Stuart Parnell, who had died a few weeks earlier.
But from the time it was founded, Cusick wasn't exaggerating when he said it took off like a prairie fire. And it did. Within months it was all over the country. And it appealed to the working class and the lower tradesmen. I mean, those that had work were working 6, maybe 7 days sometimes a week. And some of the accounts of the early conditions they had, and when I say early, this went right on up to the 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
The conditions in the GAA were pretty primitive. Huge numbers, but very few facilities. What they did have, though, it was something to do on a Sunday afternoon, and that was the day they had off. The Protestants kind of were fond enough of it to start with. It was intended to be a broad church, but Sabbatarianism, not playing games on a Sunday, of course, put a bit of a barrier between them. And then as the GAA became more and more identified with the physical force movement, the Protestant component fell off. And of course in our time, in the Troubles, H-Block and so on, to be caught carrying a hurley could and did cause people to be shot. But in the early days, the hurley became a manifestation of independence. It was used in lieu of a rifle. You'd see cadres of young men marching at the big funerals, Thomas Ashe, Parnell, with hurleys at their slope, on their shoulders. We noticed even during the Troubles, I found people in Andersonstown referring to the Tipperary rifle under the bed. The Tipperary rifle was a hurley.
Okay.
And so it persisted down through the years. From the earliest days of its foundation, the castle kept an eye on it. The RIC were very strict on it because they, as they said in their report, this is a great source of recruitment for Fenianism, for physical force. The very well established tradition in Ireland of arising in every generation. So, but that was taking place, that feeling, 1880, 1890. Hurling, the Gaelic League and football, they didn't just exist in a vacuum. There was a tremendous dawning caused by the spread of education, such education as there was, the diocesan colleges and the Christian Brothers and the nuns, Sisters of Mercy, Sisters of Charity. They were creating a consciousness of being Irish. I mean, Joyce is forever quoted as going away to recreate the uncreated conscience of the race. And in fact, the GAA, the Gaelic League, all these things were doing that at the time. And you'll see there in the book a quite lyrical description of what the consciousness of being Irish meant to one young man, P.S. O'Hegarty. Now, O'Hegarty was a revolutionary, and
I heard for the first time Irish songs properly sung. Something in the songs, something in the music, something in the atmosphere gripped me. and I seemed to be put in touch with something far back in the race. I understood, accepted, and felt myself to be one with the Gael. For the first time, I saw the whole of Ireland. P.S. O'Haggerty.
He was talking to the Bureau of Military History. He was a very fine historian. He was secretary of the Department of Posts and Telegraphs in later life after independence. In that Bureau of Military History statement, 50, 60 years later, a noted historian, unemotional civil servant of high degree, he said the whole surroundings fell away and he felt himself at one with the past. He said it wasn't mysticism, it certainly wasn't in any way romanticised or like a Hollywood film about Ireland or Irish American schmaltz or anything. It was a genuine transformation. And the point is that tens of thousands of young men and women at the time had something similar, some sort of dawning consciousness of being Irish. It's known in literature as the Celtic Dawn. You've got the Abbey and the work of Yeats and Synge, Lady Gregory and so on. And of course the work of the president of the Gaelic, the founder of the Gaelic, Tahida, Douglas de Hyde. So it all had a bearing on this very powerful athletic. It was Athletic and Cultural Association, of course. Initially it was mainly athletics, the GAA. It wasn't hurling and football. But the other force that helped him, the like of Cardinal, well, he wasn't Cardinal, he was an Archbishop, Croke, he pushed it along, and his influence and his power, he was a very powerful cleric, patriotic man. He stood up to Rome as much as he stood up to the British or anybody else, and he warded off a lot of attacks on it. Some bishops were quite hostile, but his priests were encouraged to help out in the GAA, support it, and gradually other priests did throughout the country as well. And the clergy had a very big role in the early GAA. The secretaries were better educated than the average. Bishops threw the ball in, and that kind of thing. There's been a transformation from that day to this, when you had people like, what did they have down at the Ballyragget GAA club? They had a lady described, I think, as an escort.
An escort? What
there had been a GAA occasion, and later in the evening it was
I know what you mean.
One of the lads was given a birthday present.
That's right.
And by this stage the drink was flowing. One gathers, and
whoever filmed
the mobile phone. The thing had gone viral by the time the good people of Ballyragget realised to the horror of what was happening. The story goes, one chap had apparently, who was doing a lot of texting and sending stuff off around the world. He was also had on his phone, I think he was the custodian of all the telephone numbers, go to in the case of. So all the mothers and fathers and uncles and aunts.
Oh Jesus, right.
They were getting this, so it created consternation. Suffice it to say that this was somewhat different from the ambience of the early GAA.
What role did the IRB have with the GAA?
Oh, they were very influential in the organisation. There was from day one in the GAA a dichotomy. There were those who joined to play football and hurling or take part in athletic meetings, and there were those who saw it as an adjunct to revolution, a source of cultural regeneration and straight out military recruit. And that dichotomy continued for decades into the GAA's history, and that debate flared up again during the Troubles, particularly around the time of the hunger strikes and the H-blocks. They would have been great servants of the GAA, like Luke O'Toole, the secretary at the time of 1916, and he was a confidant, a close friend of Michael Collins and Harry Boland, great GAA men both. And he lived in a little house which was part of the GAA complex, and he made it possible for Collins and Boland, whenever they wanted to relax, they could have a puck around in Croke Park.
Yeah.
But he didn't allow the organisation to be aligned publicly. It was by this stage there had been resolutions passed were non-political. If they gave a slightest hint or chance to the castle to close them down, they would.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And as a seditious organisation, I mean, they were forever raiding matches and that kind of thing. Depended on the temper of the times.
Yeah.
But at times of political excitation, the RIC had the GAA in the crosshairs.
Yeah.
One of the most famous episodes in GAA history is Gaelic Sunday, as the world knows. In the winter of 1918, Sinn Féin swept the board in the general election that was held that year. But Gaelic Sunday is very significant because one of the rows at the time between the GAA and the authorities in Dublin Castle was that there was a proposal to make the GAA pay an entertainment tax.
Okay.
And great patriotic aversion to giving money to the castle, and I think the castle had backed off pretty well, but the GAA chose it to the issue as a show of strength. Collins and the rest of them went out and played hurling that day.
Oh yeah.
The
right.
point was that it happened at the end of August in 1918, preceded the victory of Sinn Féin in 1919 at the end of the war. It was in fact the first great opinion poll, if you like, because in defiance of the castle, the GAA members went out and they played something of the order of 1,500 matches that day.
Yeah.
And if you add up the numbers involved in the match and the spectators, it was a huge turnout.
Yeah.
And there's some lyrical prose. One chap described that he was a barman in Dublin, and he described how he played against Tipperary and went to work without any food. He went straight into work after beating Tipperary at Croke Park, and but he for a not very well educated man had a great lyrical turn of phrase, and he described how the ash clashed against the imperial eagle's claw, and the ash won. But they were purely. This is another great thing about the GAA, of course, was all voluntary.
Yeah.
But this was a great feature of it. But it was also a recruiting ground, and the great Luke O'Toole, as I say, while he kept the IRB connection in the background. Even he got caught up in the patriotic fervour when the volunteers were formed.
Yeah.
As a result, it should never be forgotten that the volunteers and the IRA and all that should never have been there. They were a reaction to the anti-democratic nature of the Tory party at the time and the utilisation of the orange card. It had the effect, though, of launching in response to the Orange Volunteers, the UVF, the Green Volunteers, the Irish National Volunteers, and O'Toole actually went on the platform in the Rotunda the night of the foundation of the Volunteers, and obviously clearly aligned himself with the, though supposedly non-political, he was clearly in favour of young men, present GAA men, joining the Volunteers. And in fact, Nolan, the president, Kilkenny man, he advised them to join. He advised the GAA players to join the Volunteers so that they could learn to shoot straight. And he didn't mean shooting straight in front of the goal.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So that was the kind of mix, the ambience.
Okay.
And finally, of course, when the after 16 and the Volunteers have been reformed, and in effect the decision was made to have an army. Which, if you have an army, you're going to go to war.
Yeah.
And the meeting to do that was held in Croke Park,
Okay.
a place called the Pavilion. Yeah, the delegates sat around and what we'd call bales of hay today, and on the day or two after it, you'll find in the Bureau of Military History records the account, I quote him in the book, one chap who was at the meeting, and he heard Collins he called out to Luke O'Toole's house. He had some message for him, and he was listening to the conversation of Boland and Collins, and Mulcahy was there.
Yeah.
And Mulcahy was advocating, brigade structure, discipline, top down, whereas Collins was in effect championing guerrilla warfare, local authority, hit when you can, disappear, and those vital movements took place literally in the shadow of Croke Park, in Croke Park. So it gives you an indication of how it was. There was once the trouble started, it was utterly cemented onto the GAA was cemented onto the national movement by Bloody Sunday.
Yeah.
Cemented in blood.
The black and tans in auxiliaries on Bloody Sunday allegedly found weapons after the incident. Could you maybe describe some of the moments you found interesting in terms of the story of Bloody Sunday?
Well, Bloody Sunday was one of the most interesting moments for me in the whole book. I'll tell you what happened now, just starting with my own experience.
Yeah.
There's a very fine man in the GAA, very good GAA man, good Irishman, Peter McKenna.
Yeah.
He'd been the development officer of the GAA. He'd been responsible for the new stands and that sort of thing. And he brought me out. I heard, I thought might be an urban myth, but I wanted to check it out. It was so extraordinary and fantastical. After the great match between the English and the Irish rugby teams at Croke Park, a rumour started. Actually, I heard it from a member of Coola, at least from his daughter. Coola is the local GAA club in Dorky. And the daughter came to me for help with her MA. And she mentioned that her father had been telling her after the match that the try Gervin Dempsey scored for Ireland, which put the tin lid on the English hopes of winning, that try was actually scored where Michael Hogan fell on Bloody Sunday. Michael was the Tipperary man who was shot that day as the match was in progress. And I went, saw Peter, and he got the plans, and we went out to Croke Park. The reason for the plans is that a lot of things were turned around and changed here and there from the time of Bloody Sunday. Yeah. But we paced it out with the plans, and true enough, the place Gervin Dempsey scored the try is where Michael Hogan died.
Everybody knows about the Sam Maguire Cup around Ireland, but they don't know who Sam Maguire was, or even how he was involved in the War of Independence. Would you like to maybe talk a little bit about that? Or?
I would. There were two very moving moments in the research and in the writing of that, producing that book. And one of them was on the night of the launch in the museum in Croke Park. It was launched by that great man, Micheál and Murahurty. And while Micheál was speaking, I sat in a kind of an alcove. And I happened to glance up, and I discovered I was sitting under the Sam Maguire Cup, the huge cup. Those fellas who lift that up, you see them, they're strong men. It's a huge club. Yeah. Now, Sam Maguire was a very, very sad story. Yeah. Sam Maguire was the principal IRB operative in England, close to Michael Collins, and responsible for a lot of the activity over there, and saved a lot of volunteers, caused others to get killed. But he was a very genuine Fenian. And he, after Collins was shot, in any case, he had not been happy with the treaty. But still, he had to get out after the shooting of Henry Wilson.
Yeah.
I think Sam was probably involved in the planning of that.
Yeah.
And he got out anyway, and because of his record, the new Free State government gave him a job in the civil service. Now, he had been in the British civil service, postal service, and because of his Fenianism, there was no question of him getting a pension. And because of his rejection of the treaty, he lost the job in Ireland.
Okay.
Now, Cosgrave himself wrote him a cheque for £100, probably out of his own funds. Because, I mean, okay, he was against the treaty, but he had been one of their principal operatives during the War of Independence when they were all brothers in arms. And after some struggling with his conscience, Sam decided to accept the cheque. And that was the last money he got. He went back down, came from near Dunmanway, County Cork, and he literally probably largely died from starvation.
Okay.
Lived in very poor circumstances with his sister. The local people wanted to help him, and in fact sort of local politicians came out to him and asked him to come in from this very unsuitable dwelling he had in an unheated, drafty, windy, damp place. But he was too proud to come in, and he died.
Okay.
You could call it TB, call it what you want, but it was malnutrition and starvation and heartbreak too, the way things had turned out. And because of what he had done, some of his old friends got together and they bought that cup to be presented for the football, the All-Ireland. In the same way, the McCarthy Cup for hurling was presented in recognition of the services of the McCarthys, father and son, but they were not, they were sort of fairly comfortably off builders in England, quite different to Sam. But that's how the two trophies came. A lot of people wouldn't know who he is or how he died. You see all this fairly prosperous All-Ireland crowd, cheering the awarding of the Samuel Cup, Maguire Cup. When you think of the tragedy the day behind it.
You mentioned in the book, how were students, maybe before the emergence of the GAA, being taught at the time as happy English children?
Well, that's a quotation from a textbook. You see, one of the most important roles the GAA performed was the furtherance of a consciousness of being Irish, that we were separate to England, that we had our own games. Now, in popular culture, the games that the populace play are a very, very important social and indeed political force in the nation. The colonisation of Ireland was extraordinarily thorough, and so much so that before the invasion of Korea by the Japanese, they sent 4 professors over to the British Museum, and they studied the best colonial model to form to impose after they'd conquered Korea, and they chose the British one. It was the foremost colonial model in the world. It depended on the extirpation of local culture, inculcation of feelings of inferiority for the master race. Of course, the language went, dress, natural dress, the economy, the agricultural economy as it largely was turned over. Now, I hadn't realised that until I visited Korea several decades ago, and I was received by the then President Park's personal assistant, a former ambassador to Washington, very distinguished man. And he knew an extraordinary lot about Ireland. He was able to quote Yeats and so on. And I thought he'd got this from the literature, and I asked him how come he knew so much. Was he a Yeats and Abbey fan.
Yeah.
He said he was to a degree, but that wasn't how he came to study Ireland. It was because of the colonial heritage. He found the respect that he had a great respect for the Irish and how they, surmounted the assimilation period and been taught that they were English, not Irish. And their guidebook at that time, the first line was, the Koreans are the Irish of Southeast Asia.
Right.
Yeah, they went on to say they're fond of learning, drinking, dancing, respectful of the aged. I got if they saw the state of the homelessness and the health service nowadays, I wonder would they agree with that.